Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our discussion today about cybersecurity in biotech. Pandemic has pushed a number of industries to make a new step. Biotech could be for sure seen as one of them. Never before so many people assumed to know so much about research, biotechnology, vaccines. With that, new fields become more obvious and maybe even more in danger. I have invited today Christoph Eichen, one of the authors of white paper Cybersecurity Concerns in Biotech and Pharmaceutical Industry and co-founder of Acuron. Christoph received a PhD in chemistry and protein crystallography and structural biology. He deepened his research further at Houston Medical Center Institute Biosciences and Technology. Research focus lied in structural biology, aspects of infectious diseases such as Lyme disease, staph infections, and tuberculosis. Additionally, he has brought in his knowledge and expertise in the industry. In constant exchange with academic and industry clients worldwide, he has worked providing services on microRNA and peptide microarrays. Switching fields in 2016, he worked in change management and compliance, which led to his current position in information and cybersecurity compliance at Acuron. Dear Christoph, welcome to our Fireside chat today, and please tell us what was the motivation to publish a paper mid of 2020 and dwelling upon a cybersecurity topic in biotech field.
Thanks, Maria, for having me and the introduction. Well, the timing obviously was related to COVID because having worked in the industry for almost a decade, I was aware that cybersecurity didn't really play a big role in biotech. Oftentimes caused also by the fact that a lot of custom script, custom software is being used on computers that might be completely outdated. I recall working with computers that were running on Windows 95 and Windows 98, which is of course a security nightmare. And so I was aware of the particular challenges in the industry, which are actually kind of similar to what our main clients at Acuron faces, which are the defense industrial base, because they're also oftentimes using highly specialized manufacturing devices, let's say, that are also very difficult to upgrade without interrupting the entire process of manufacturing. So when COVID came around, it was very obvious that a lot of interest was on the getting the IP of the vaccines, obviously, intellectual property, and it was also obvious to everybody in the industry, in biotech and in cybersecurity, that it was not your random hacker, not your random script that runs against everybody, but that more nation states were involved. Let's say China, for example, or Iran, and some of them actually put that in their doctrine that the biotech sector should be a main target for them in the future. So that was the main reason, and being aware of the fact that cybersecurity is really not a priority in biotech, at least not until now. Yeah, that was the root motivation, and by now it's a little bit outdated. The report, we're working on a new version right now, so we're welcoming questions or any input that you have for the new report.
That's for sure great, and I think it's in high demand in the industry. As I said, so I have the feeling that it's kind of more in the focus of biotechnology, or pharmaceutical companies are now more in the focus also of the society, which was not even 5 years before. And it's for sure interesting that you say that basically the core activity you're currently in and where you're helping the clients is basically to ensure the information which they handle and store, which is proprietary information, it's not just an information, it's a business asset, which has to be safe. And if it's passed to the further, like to clients, then this pathway is also secured. Because you have mentioned working back then with old software and computers, could you imagine, or have you been thinking that time that there was a need in cybersecurity? Because is it the experience which you gain that has made it also more obvious for you that this cybersecurity topic is very important, or is it really the change of the situation at all?
I would say both. I remember being in the lab as a postdoc, and one of our lab mates suddenly realized that he can sniff out all our passwords. And that was the first time that I was ever that I ever thought about security. But I mean, this was last century. But after that, of course, I was also maintaining, for example, the website of LC Sciences at the time. And it was just mind-blowing how many attacks just the website receives every single day. And that was really the second time where I really realized, okay, this might be a big problem. And of course, then with the pandemic and the sudden shift to working remotely, working from home, that opened up a whole new field for attackers, because suddenly everybody was working, like I said, from home with their home devices oftentimes. Prior to that, an issue was already bringing your own device, meaning people bringing their own phone to work and basically jumping through or poking holes into the security measures of a company. Because back in the days, you had companies had it was fairly simple to keep your infrastructure secure. You had your internal computer network, and then you had a firewall around it, and that was protecting you. And then suddenly people were bringing in these mobile phones, other IoT devices, Internet of Things devices that were basically jumping over the firewall. And suddenly your entire security posture was kind of, looked more like Swiss cheese with a lot of holes in it. And yeah, so it's a combination of both. That times have changed because of the infrastructure changes, the devices we use, the sudden shift to work from home, working remotely. Yeah, that all was the perfect storm and led to a lot of attacks.
Yeah. And that's interesting. So you are talking a lot about devices, and that's also the experience with what I had. So at Biotech, we started to take an action to address the cybersecurity issues earlier on, because we are also for sure dealing with our internal information, with research information of clients, and we have to make sure that it's safe. But talking about cybersecurity always go, at least in the first or most of the time, so what I deal with, go in a direction of hardware. So basically people are thinking, okay, I have to install the firewall on my computer and then I'm safe, and so there is no further problem occurring there. And basically that's kind of all size fit solution, as we all have certain hardware and then we are safe. Do you think that it's so, or is it also the change over the last decades, over the last years, or is it important at all, or maybe there are some other issues which we have to deal with? And is it then actually the first question at all for the first meeting, what kind of hardware we have? Or is it then maybe the last question which the people have to ask themselves?
It's kind of in the middle. I mean, as a first step, when we come into looking at a client's environment, of course, we take inventory of their IT infrastructure. So hardware and software plays a role there. But in general, when you look at cybersecurity and when you're starting, I think it's a big misconception that it's there's so many misconceptions, but one of them is a big one is, oh, it's something for the IT department, and it's related to software and hardware, and nothing could be further from the truth, because interestingly, if you read the ISO standard for cybersecurity, which is 27001 and 2 for the controls, you will see that the very first line item there is that the cybersecurity program has to have the support of the management and the executives. Mm-hmm. So it emphasizes the cultural, company cultural aspect of it, and the fact that it has to be supported and wanted by the management. And that's what we've seen over and over again. If this is not the case, it's very, very difficult to implement any meaningful cybersecurity. For example, if you are trying to get all your employees on board with new measurements and they might think it's kind of cumbersome now suddenly they have to authenticate themselves through multi-factor authentication or so on. And then they see the CEO that is still using an AOL email address, not even a company email address, right? Then it's kind of difficult. Yeah. And so that just as an example. So the human factor is huge. Also, when you look at the causes of cyber incidents and cyber attacks that were successful, depending on which report you read, almost 2/3 are caused by employees, willingly or unwillingly. So think about ransomware, which is a big topic, an issue since a few years now. It's typically a human error, a human that clicked on a link and got the computer infected. And yes, of course, there are tools that try to prevent and to filter out all these dangerous messages, but there's nothing like 100% security, and nor is there any program that is 100% foolproof. So yeah, once in a while something slips through, and then basically the first line of defense has to be your employee. And so to get them on board, I think is crucial. And it's typically initially you have always the initial resistance, or oftentimes obviously it's much easier when you're working with a startup to set the culture right from the beginning, which is of course always much easier, versus a company that just went through a merger and acquisition, or a big company with hundreds of employees where you suddenly have to implement changes. And what we found is very successful is in basically explaining that all these new policies, procedures, and additional hoops that you have to jump through as an employee, that they actually benefit the employee as well, because as long as they follow the new rules or the policies and procedures, then they are safe. They are not responsible from a legal perspective. And yeah, I found that is oftentimes what really brings them on board at the end of the day.
Yes, from what you're saying, it's very important to raise the awareness, and actually at all levels of hierarchy, from the very, let's say, low positioned employee up to the CEO. So otherwise you would always have this human error, and then basically no software, hardware will help you to decrease the risk, right? Exactly. But what's also interesting, what you're saying, that it's easier to start right from the beginning at the startup. I could be thinking that the small company would assume, well, it's not really important for them because it's mostly the big companies who experiences this ransomware attacks and have cybersecurity problems, and we read about these cases in news. But seldomly, I guess, there is a small company or small or medium-sized business which has been attacked. Or do I also have a misconception there?
Well, obviously, when, let's say, Merck gets attacked like in 2017 and lost $1 billion worth of revenue and or had basically the cost of $1 billion associated with that ransomware attack, obviously that makes the headlines. If a small startup gets attacked, it doesn't necessarily make the headlines. Also because obviously they don't necessarily have the interest in reporting that. The larger companies, and depending on what type of contracts they are working on, they have oftentimes contractual requirements and legal requirements to report these incidences. Actually, I just saw the headline in the news that Germany is trying to also change these reporting requirements, which I thought was very interesting because traditionally, I hate to say it, but Germany is a little behind when it comes to cybersecurity and taking it seriously. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting development. But yeah, one of the misconceptions, because we talked about that just in the previous point, is also that people think, oh, we're too small, we're just a startup, who's interested in us, who will attack us, right? But people need to realize that a lot of the attacks are not really selective. These are just scripts or emails that are blasted out, and yeah, they don't care how big or small the company is. Whoever clicks on the link and gets the computer infected, for example, then in the case of ransomware, then you're a new customer of theirs. And yeah, so the size doesn't really matter of the company, of the target. Obviously, if you have a bigger company like Merck, in that example that I just brought up from 2017, they obviously they're a big target, especially with COVID and the vaccine development. Like Pfizer, of course, was a big target or is a big target. All the big pharmaceutical companies are targets of not only the unselective hackers or bad actors, but also nation states. And yeah, that's just an increased risk for them. But obviously they have also the budget typically, or should allocate the budget to cybersecurity to counter that accordingly.
Yeah, well, that's for sure awakening what you are saying now, that basically everyone or each size company has to take care of the cybersecurity. And then the question which will arise most of the time, I guess, where to start with or what to start with. Shall they immediately call you and then ask, oh, please, can you establish the cybersecurity system for us? Or are there maybe some basic steps which can be initially done already internally before asking for external support?
Well, it really depends on the situation of the company, right? So if you're a startup, it would certainly be a good idea to develop your IT infrastructure with cybersecurity in mind. And if you have the know-how in-house, great. Otherwise, there are companies like ours to help you with that and to do that in a cost-efficient way as well. And nowadays and I would have never thought that I would ever say that. If you would have asked me 7 years ago to what I think about the cloud, my answer would have been completely different. But nowadays, with there really solid cloud solutions out there, that are relatively affordable and don't require you to get 1,000 different tools in terms of cybersecurity. So planning that right from the beginning is certainly good. And like I said, if you need help, hire a consultant, because the cost of of that will be lower than any incidents in the long term. Another aspect is that especially startups oftentimes have cybersecurity requirements that are imposed by investors that want to see that their money is invested well, and not that they pour their money into a startup that doesn't take precaution to secure the intellectual property that they're developing. As a startup, going back to sticking with startups for now, the big advantage you also have is to set the organizational structure right from the beginning. For example, the cybersecurity department, even if you don't have the manpower to have your own CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, but let's say somebody's wearing that as an additional part-time hat, the reporting structure is very important, because oftentimes what we see with larger, bigger companies that are several decades old, the reporting structure is just wrong there. So any cybersecurity program that they're trying to implement is fails oftentimes because of that. For example, if you have computers were originally introduced in the industry for accounting, in generally speaking. So then the IT department oftentimes was hierarchically right under the CFO because of that. And then oftentimes they task the IT department with the cybersecurity job as well, which is a bad idea to begin with. But then you have the situation where basically you have the IT department and Chief Information Security Officer, and they are both reporting to the CFO, who of course is concerned about costs. So you have conflict of interest there. So the ideal scenario would be, the way it should be, is that the cybersecurity representative is basically reporting straight to the CEO and nobody else, to eliminate that conflict of interest there. Yeah, and so setting up the right structures is important, besides all hardware or policies, procedures, and so on. I'm not sure, does it answer your question?
Yes, and I will come with the next question. It's very interesting that you mentioned that the structure is so important, and especially at startups. I think in startups, the structure is important anyhow, different kind of topics and aspects. But what is also important, what you have just mentioned, are the costs. So for sure, or maybe not for sure, but like for the normal perspective, people are assuming, okay, cybersecurity, it should be connected to high costs, and if we need to pay for the establishing this great and perfect working security system that we already poor at the beginning. Is it true, or is it really worth to spend the money on cybersecurity? How do you analyze it for the company, or what would you advise in this stage?
Are you talking about startups in particular, or just as an example?
Well, I think startups are more concerned about the costs. So for a big corporate, it's maybe less important, because you have also just mentioned the structure is very important, and it's great to have the right structure at the beginning before changing the structure after the decades of working.
Yeah.
But for sure, if you have, you can give some assumption also maybe for bigger companies, that would be also great.
Well, I mean, cybersecurity is about risk management, and it depends on about how your appetite for risk looks like, and that oftentimes is, of course, determined by your investors. Talking about a startup, so I think I mentioned earlier, oftentimes investors want to make sure that that their investment is protected, or that the IP generated with their investment is protected. Or if they invest into a company during a merger and acquisition procedure, for example, that they make sure that that their investment is solid, not that they acquire a company that's breached. For example, when Yahoo was bought, it turned out later that Yahoo had been breached, and that was a huge, had a big impact, obviously. But in terms of risk management and cost, obviously the cost to implement something depends on the company size, the regulations that they have to comply with or want to comply with, because oftentimes cybersecurity is just cost of doing business. For example, a lot of our clients are in the defense industrial base, so they have contracts with the DoD, the Department of Defense, or their contractors, and they're simply required to fulfill certain requirements. So they don't really have an option. So it's cost of doing business in these particular scenarios. Other times you want to spend the money to show to your potential clients or collaboration partners that you're taking and making an effort to be secure. And to put cost into perspective, typically, even if you get breached, and the average cost of a data breach is as of last year is $4.24 million worldwide. And biotech is not necessarily the healthcare sector, but the healthcare sector in particular is almost double that. And this not just for last year, but since many years, the healthcare sector has extremely high cost of data breaches. And when you look at companies that are well prepared, the cost of the impact that they have is only a third of that. So it's basically like a protecting yourself against the worst case scenario, obviously. And if the worst case scenario happens nevertheless, then you're not looking at 4.24 million, but roughly 1 million in costs. And looking at that 4.24 million as a rough number for the average data breach, it's interesting where the cost comes into play, because when I first looked at that, I immediately assumed, okay, just notifying everybody will be a huge cost, but that's really not it. It's basically roughly 1/3 just finding the data breach. Then post-breach is another third, basically getting the machines running again, and so on, getting the basically remediation work. And then the last third is basically lost business, or business loss of reputation, loss of contracts, the money spent to redo everything in case your hardware and software, your hardware is unusable, and so on. And another advantage of having cybersecurity in place is that depending on what insurance you go with, they typically give discounts for the cyber insurance if you have a solid program in place. And it's always, what is the alternative, right? Because it's about risk management, and a larger company, obviously, the impact would be huge, but they might have the financial resources to weather it. I recall an incident here in Houston, where we are located recently. I don't recall how many years ago exactly this happened. I want to say 4 years ago. There was a ransomware attack on a small business. They were the biggest privately owned company that was building steel buildings, basically like how do you call it? Sheds and stuff like that, constructed out of metal. And they got hit with ransomware, and it was so bad that all their machines, manufacturing machines, were impacted, and it resulted in the bankruptcy of this long traditional company. And it was so bad that when they filed for bankruptcy, typically you have to provide your financial records and so on. They couldn't even provide that because their computer were blocked and wrecked. And in that particular case, they did actually pay the ransom, but we always advise against paying the ransom because you never know whether they will really decrypt it for you or give you the decryption keys. So yeah, and in that case they didn't. So bankruptcy was in their case the end result, and it's not too uncommon for, especially for smaller companies.
Yeah, well, for smaller companies, I think they're even faster in the bankruptcy than the bigger ones. And even
Exactly.
like with your example, the company with a long history already still could not manage it. It's really a bad sign for the others, or a good sign to start early with cybersecurity. And another interesting point, which you have mentioned about venture capital and merger and acquisitions. So that especially also if we talk about biotech and startups, there are a lot of deals going on for sure each year. And it's very important for startups then to know that investors or even the buyer, like a pharmaceutical company, might have also a look at the cybersecurity situation of the company during a due diligence. Is it already, from your experience, is it already established procedure, or it still depends on the investor and the situation and the company, maybe the buyer, or is it already a state of the art that it's always done?
I would say it still depends. Typically, the larger investors groups, they pay attention to this, and with merger and acquisitions, it's really case by case, and of course the size of the deal and so on. But yeah, it's certainly becoming more and more common that people not only look at the financial data but also at the cybersecurity status of the company. Because I mean, the last thing you want to do is buy a company that you plan to merge with, and then at the moment when you merge the IT departments, then suddenly your company gets infected as well, and you were not even aware that the company you bought was infected. So yeah.
Well, we started in 2020, or was discussion in 2020, then went back to 70s, I guess, 80s, 90s. And so the next question would be, what are the latest development what you have seen, or what do you expect in the next years, and what we should to be prepared for?
Yeah, I think the whole pandemic for the biotech sector was a wake-up call in terms of cybersecurity, and in general, obviously the ongoing conflicts and wars across the globe, especially Ukraine right now, bring that to the forefront of let's say companies that are in the defense industrial base. So there's more and more regulations that are being put in place by different governments here in the US, for example, but as mentioned in Germany, there are also some finally some changes that are happening. So the latest things that I could point out are changes to cyber insurance policies. So in the past, insurance companies would insure you against cyber incidences, and unless you were negligent, you were covered. However, just a few days or maybe 2 weeks ago, a lot of the carriers announced some changes which have major impact, which is that if you had a serious cyber attack and it was caused by a nation state actor, that you're not covered under their policy. And obviously it has a big impact because the incident that I mentioned from Merck in 2017 with the loss of $1 billion, it was also a case like that where the insurance company just didn't want to pay because they said, well, it was a nation state actor and that's considered an act of war. And that's why they have had this long legal battle. I believe it's still ongoing. So yeah, so that's a big change. So don't think that only because you have cyber insurance, you're off the hook, because it depends on who attacks you. And another term that just came up that I noticed maybe 2 weeks ago is we all know ransomware. It's now a common phrase or common word, but another word is now termed killware, which is basically a description of ransomware attacks or attacks especially in the medical field, in the health sector, which is designed to disable machines and to basically kill people. These are 2 points that recently came up. And just one general thing that I want to mention was that cybersecurity and information security, oftentimes these terms are being used side by side or interchangeably. And when you're talking about cybersecurity, what often gets overlooked is that it's really information security. And if you look at the standards, the frameworks like ISO or CMMC or NIST, then you realize that also physical security plays a role. So I just want to let people know that it includes physical security. So when we go out to a client, we don't do it remotely typically for the first pass through, because if you want to get a good feel and impression of the company, how things are working, you want to look at the physical security as well. And yeah, you would miss these things if you would do it remotely.
Yes, thank you very much for all this information, and also on the last developments. I think it's important also to mention what you have briefly mentioned in the beginning, that you're planning to work on the update of this white paper, and I guess it's also great, and thank you very much for this work, because I think it's very important also to keep to raise the awareness what we were talking about, and keep an eye on the not only the latest development, but also the importance of the topic and the development internally, and the structuring in structuring this cybersecurity topic inside the company, right? You have mentioned that you would be interested to get maybe some questions, or if people would have specific question, what is then the best way to reach out to you for this white paper? Could you maybe provide an email address for this?
Sure. So the current white paper is you can download on our website under publications, and you can either I don't know how you want to publish this on YouTube or so, but maybe you can put a link down there. It's basically, if you want to have questions answered or included in the next version of the white paper, just email bio@ikiron.com. That's probably the easiest, or otherwise they can reach out to you and you forward the questions to me.
Okay, great. So thank you very much, Christoph, again for your time today, and for this interesting discussion, trying to address a lot of topics, and I guess giving a lot of information to think about, and hopefully to implement, and not to forget, human error or human impact is the highest probably in the whole topic of cybersecurity. Yeah, never underestimate humans, exactly. So in good and the bad aspects, yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Okay, thanks, Maria. Thank you very much. Okay, bye. Bye.